If a Puyo pops in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound?
Of course it does. Regardless if anyone is there or not, it will always make a sound, for the laws of physics apply regardless of whether there is an observer or not.
Adam, stop ruining my fun. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Mattoon Corner. I feel different. Adam, what about you?
I'm feeling pretty dapper myself, to be honest.
That word doesn't work there.
I know.
Well, no point overthinking it. Welcome to the Mattoon Corner. So last time on the show, we decided to tackle a pretty unique puzzle series, that being the Puyo Puyo franchise. For those of you who don't know, Puyo Puyo is a Japanese puzzle game similar to Tetris. Puyos fall from the top and you have to organize groups to pop in rapid succession, forming a chain to interrupt your opponent's screen. If your Puyos reach a spot on the top, you lose. It's a pretty simple puzzle game, one that's gained a surprisingly large audience and following, either thanks to its addicting gameplay or the shocking amount of lore. And I've made it my goal to talk about as many entries in this series as I can.
Or you could simply give up and move on with your life.
Ignore him. So last time we talked about the arcade release of the original Puyo Puyo. It was a fun game, albeit very cheap with its difficulty and somewhat meh in other categories. But overall a pretty enjoyable experience. And since the game was successful, Compile, the company responsible for the series in the first place, decided to make a sequel. Enter Puyo Puyo Tsu. Yes, the title's a pun. Anyway, Puyo Puyo Tsu can be considered the most important entry in the Puyo Puyo franchise, as many of the game's well-known rules and gimmicks were established here. While the main mechanics of the original game are still here, many quality-of-life changes were made to the game to make it more engaging and overall, more fun. Now, before we begin, I'd like to point out that I'll be using a fan translation of the Super Nintendo version of the game, made by J2E. That's because the game wasn't originally released in English, at least not until the release of Sega 3D Classics Collection on the 3DS, and even then the game still isn't entirely in English. And while I'd love to show off the official version, my 3DS doesn't have a capture card, so I'm afraid I'll have to settle on emulation. With that out of the way, let's get started. As a sequel to a popular game, Puyo Puyo Tsu put a lot of effort into recreating the enjoyment of the original game and improving it in order to maintain player interest, and honestly, it shows. The gameplay is standard fare for a Puyo game. Puyos fall, you connect 4, make a chain, rinse, and repeat. But as I said, many quality of life changes were made to this game, changes that continue to be present in every Puyo game till this very day. There's a reason that Tsu rules are the most popular in the series community, because it's often considered to be the most skill expressive. Let me explain. First of all, Puyo Puyo Tsu reduced the number of colors of Puyo on the screen from 5 to 4, already making organizing your Puyos easier, and simultaneously making waiting for a certain color to be more viable. Second, you can now rotate Puyos in both directions, and you can rotate them in a tight corridor as well. Thirdly, as the match goes on, the game will drop more and more garbage Puyo per chain. The most important change, however, was the ability to offset a Puyo chain. When garbage Puyo is sent to you or your opponent, the amount is represented here on the top of the screen. The amount sent is proportional to the size of the chain you pulled off and how many Puyos there were in the chain in total. In the original Puyo game, when garbage Puyo was sent over, the only thing you could do was get rid of it after it had already fallen. Puyo Puyo Tsu, on the other hand, lets you get rid of it before it falls. By countering with a chain of your own, you'll be able to not only cancel out the garbage Puyo, but if your chain manages to be bigger than theirs, you'll be able to send garbage Puyo of your own. And that's offsetting in a nutshell. It gets really heated when two people manage to pull off a chain at the same time. You'll be surprised how hyped people seem to get. If you want a more humorous example, go to this video over here. I'll put a link in the description. Offsetting would later go on to be a very important part of both Fever and Transformation rules, but I'm getting very ahead of myself. The point is, Puyo Puyo Tsu's inclusion of offsetting made the game much more competitive friendly. There's a reason why most Puyo tournaments play using these rules. Heck, Puyo Puyo was recently recognized in Japan as an official esport, and I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for these mechanics. I could go on for a while about how offsetting was one of the best changes they made to this game, but I don't want this video to get too long, so let's move on from that and head on to the rest of the game. The main game modes in this game are a single player arcade and a multiplayer mode. There are a few other single player modes in this game, but honestly they're just there for a distraction. I mentioned in the original game that it was much funner while playing multiplayer, and that's pretty much a recurring element in all the Puyo games. That's not to say single player options aren't fun, but it's a lot more appealing to go head to head with someone than beating a computer. I will say this though, the game looks a lot better than the original. Even if they were part of the same console generation, the difference between the two is noticeable. Even returning characters have brand new sprites and overall a much cleaner aesthetic. The arcade structure is also a lot more appealing, both visually and when you actually play. The last few stages are all set, but the first few stages have a bit of a random element to them. You never know who you might go up against. You can time it well enough to pick who you want, but take too long and the game chooses for you. You need to reach a certain score if you want to progress, so the better you do, the less matches you'll have to play. And hey, boss interactions are here too! Although I have to say, it could be because this is a fan translation, but some of this dialogue is kinda meh. And from what I could tell, the official release had Japanese dialogue anyway, and it pretty much removed the interactions in the first place. Suddenly, I'm very glad I decided to play this version. At least the character sprites are adorable, and at least whoever translated this did Chezo justice. One downside, however, the game over screen is really boring. I forgot to show it off in the last video, but the original Puyo Puyo had a really cute and charming game over screen, with this really well made art of Arl panicking. God, that came out wrong. But the point is, it was a great KO screen. Here it's just a sprite of her laying on the ground. A bit of a downgrade to a game that pretty much improved everything the series had to offer at the time. But I'm not so paid to let something like that ruin my enjoyment of the game. Story-wise, the game is basic, once again. The Dark Prince Satan builds a tower for some reason, and Arl has to climb to the top and stop whatever nefarious plan he has. Just another day in the life of Arl. Again, much like the first one, story is honestly an afterthought. Just a simple and silly reason for the Puyo battles to happen in the first place. Although this is where the series really started embracing its zaniness. The interactions are a bit longer and Arl's a lot less mean-spirited compared to the original. The fact that this series still has any semblance of a story is still pretty mind-boggling to me. But hey, it's still pretty charming. One thing I will say though is that this game's soundtrack is severely lacking. I don't think it's bad, but definitely feels less inspired than the first one. The second and third floor's theme is a personal favorite of mine, but where are the character themes? Where's Final of Puyo Puyo? Well, regardless of soundtrack, you reach the top of the tower and beat the Dark Prince at his own game, who had apparently built the tower to get Arl's attention. Yeah, if you want to know where his infatuation with Arl came from, it was pretty much cemented into the series from here on. It was hinted that he wanted her as a bride in the first one, but here the knob is cranked up to 11. So Arl celebrates, but not before the Dark Prince reveals that the tower is actually a rocket ship and sends them both into space for a honeymoon? What? And this is probably the element of the story that shines the most. Just how nonsensical the game's cast can be, and the reason they're so popular nowadays anyway. It was at this point that Compile embraced the exaggerated nature of the characters, and it would go on to do so for the third entry as well. They took a bit of a step back for the fourth one, but I'll get back to that later. So with that, Arl parachutes away and the Dark Prince falls to his untimely demise, never to be seen again. Nah, he's fine, he just bumped his head really hard. And with that, the game is over.
Not quite.
What do you mean no? I won! There's nothing left for me to do in the game. There's a true ending?! Yeah, to my surprise, there's a hidden ending in the game. A puzzle game. It's like those secret final bosses in fighting games, except for Puyo Puyo, which, to be fair, is kinda like a fighting game. So in order to reach a secret fight with the masked Satan, You need to reach the top of the tower without losing once, and you need to reach a certain score. It took more tries than I'd like to admit, but I finally managed to make it to him, and... meh. It's really just the Dark Prince's AI with a different sprite and a much more satisfying ending. The final boss music is still the same and there's really no incentive to unlock it. I figured they at least changed the background music or something. Overall, Puyo Puyo Tsu is a much better entry than its predecessor. My biggest gripe with that game was its difficulty and how it often felt like the game slowed down the more I lost. That's thankfully not the case here, and all the stages are much more slower and much more manageable straight from the get-go, with the exception of Dark Prince, because of how his fight isn't supposed to be slow. The one that actually makes sense. The game controls better, and the new mechanics make it feel much more skill-based than the original. I definitely recommend this game if you're interested in learning more about Puyo Puyo, or if you just feel like seeing where the series started picking up steam. And with all that being said, I'm afraid we've reached the end of the video. Thanks for watching, everyone! Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Mattoon Corner if you want to see more. Adam, what's the next game on the list?
That would be the sequel to this game, Puyo Puyo Tsu.
Well, that should be fun. Until next time, everyone, and remember to be cool and be creative.